It's been a while since I've considered issues regarding the meaning of Manet's portraits of Morisot. The vast literature, the scholarship dealing with questions and concerns, really, the bibliography is immense. Numerous museum exhibitions devoted to their art and their friendship, navigating it all, being responsible to everything written and said so that one's own descriptions and explanations are one's own. And now with the internet, it's been a while since I've looked closely at the portraits themselves, and really, that's where the fun is. You are looking at several still lives, absolutely knockout paintings, but I'm not going to talk about these. I wish I knew enough to say a single word about late century French still life painting. I'm going to talk about several portraits and the art of portraiture. I'm not sure anymore how many were painted, 12 or 13 works in total. Portraits executed by Edouard Manet of Berthe Morisot. The point to be made is, I haven't kept up. There are new things out there I know not, things I haven't read, I haven't seen, and I've forgotten some of the things I'd once knew. Just checked, and the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco is having an exhibition called Manet and Morisot running from October of 2025 to March of 2026. Nice. I'd love to have the new book out by Yale University Press, Manet and Morisot, in part to make sure whatever I say is not somehow in there. Anyway, I guess my timing is right. If I'm borrowing anything that I know of, it's from my college mentor and advisor, a wonderful teacher, first-rate scholar and friend who first showed me Manet's paintings, describing and exploring her ideas about them in a way which really lets you know her passion for the arts and for this particular artist. To her credit, she never talked much about the portraits of Morisot painted by Manet, I think with one exception. She knew it would be better if I tackled them myself. Morisot most probably became acquainted with Edouard Manet when copying masterworks in the Louvre. A formal introduction is said to have been arranged by mutual friend and fellow artist Fantin Latour. By 1868, the same year when the first portrait, The Balcony, was painted, their families had become socially intimate and their friendship blossomed. Between 1868 and 1874, Manet executed 11 different portraits of Morisot. A fact well known, it is nonetheless remarkable. The number of works in various media, again numbering 12 or 13, oil, watercolor, and print, established Morisot as the most frequently represented individual in Manet's oeuvre. The Balcony, along with this work, entitled Repose from 1870-71, shown to the public at the official Salon of 1873, are perhaps the paintings best remembered by students and scholars today interested in Manet's career. They were, in fact, the only portraits of Morisot seen by the public during the artist's lifetime. Much has been written about these works, written with great sensitivity and understanding, providing real insights. Exhibited to the public at the official salon, they are rightly regarded as two of Manet's early masterpieces, and are understood by scholars as canonical works, having great importance in the artist's development as an avant-garde painter and a painter of modern life. The Balcony, it is said, I think rightly, represents a subject inspired by Baron Haussmann's mid-century modernization of Paris. As with other artists featuring the milieu of Second Empire Parisian culture, Manet and his contemporaries present meditations on the nature of public and private life, conjoining this cultural theme with that of the dynamic relation between the viewer who looks and the figure pictured who is seen. No accident the figures pictured are artists. we see Morisot and the landscape painter Antoine Guise, also standing, facing the viewer directly, dressed in white like her counterpart. Manet presents Fanny Closs, a professional violinist and founder of the quartet Saint Cécile. They are shown to be, and importantly, are presenting themselves at the edge of the railing, looking outward to the public spaces of the city. As well-dressed and cultured friends enjoying themselves on a street-side balcony, they are presented as if on stage, in the shallow space of the picture plane, elevated slightly from the viewer, separated by the railing of the balcony and framed by the shutters of an open doorway. Looking out in different directions, the women holding props, Morisot a fan, I believe an attribute of her artistic sensibilities. Fanny holds an umbrella, a dynamic, compositional element having no practical function in the narrative. It is an emblem of the social status and refinement of the group. One of the many interstitial spaces in the modern metropolis, the balcony, like the bar and the cafe, indeed like houses of prostitution in the city, all become, as the poet Baudelaire suggested, the proper subject of modern painting, is a space where the heretofore distinct spheres of public and private life converge. This painting makes known new conditions of modern life, in part the result of Haussmann's modernizations. The growingly public aspect of modernity, what the historian Reisman would come to describe in his important study, The Lonely Crowd, as manifesting new psychological, political, and economic issues that define the individual in contemporary society, necessitates, he claims, a dual emphasis on, quote, inner-directed and other-directed social character, end quote. Indeed, this idea was expressed by contemporary critics of the painting, who saw the elevated balcony as yet another modern shopfront, a 10-cent store where figures seemed to be presented as mannequins, and everything arranged ostensibly as commodities for sale. The deft qualities of Manet's style, the facture of the work, aid in the presentation of a purposed artificiality. The genre portrait presents a meta-commentary on the forms and function of modern art. The painting is about the new painting, about art itself. Like the aspects of the figures before us, it is a fabrication. The details of their hands, it's like a musical performance. Looking again at Repose, a genre painting exhibited to the public in 1873, the spaces of private life are shown to be distinct, where identity, character, and personality are expressed differently. Same figure, another white dress, again shown holding a fan and looking outward, yet without an outward display of self-consciousness. Relaxed and seemingly absorbed in her own thoughts, Morisot is portrayed as monumental, a reclining figure on a lush couch. With her arms away from her body and a foot shown extending daringly from beneath her dress, she is a meditative figure, suggestive of the imaginative qualities of a creative personality, the realm of art and artistic creation. Her head pierces the frame of the painting shown behind her, and in a room we may take as the artist's studio, we have trouble differentiating the real-life figure of Morisot from the artist's model in Repose, a representative of the Parisienne. She is as beautiful as she is remote. What we see, what Manet presents to the viewer, are layers of fiction that become a metafiction, revealing the manners and modes, the purpose and function of art itself. Surely the importance given these two works should alert us to the significance of Manet's many other portraits of Morisot. The balcony and Repose were often seen by the artist's contemporaries and by scholars today as related directly to Luncheon on the Grass and Olympia, the seminal works that established Manet's reputation and propelled his career as a leading painter. Only recently have the lesser-known private portraits been studied as works expressive of Manet's modernism. To understand the significance of these portraits in terms of the artist's development, perhaps we should consider them as a group or series of kindred works, as are Luncheon on the Grass and Olympia. Perhaps they should be described in the same manner as the artist's imaging of Victorine Meurent, the leading protagonist pictured in 8 portraits and paintings including Olympia, Luncheon on the Grass, The Street Singer, and Gare Saint-Lazare. Given the many paintings of Morisot executed within a short period, Manet may be seen to have been exploring the traditions and expanding the boundaries of modern portraiture. As with other like-minded artists of his generation working within and against the conventions of modern portraiture, Manet's portraits of Morisot manifest his ambition to express essential qualities of modern identity within the genre of painting most responsible and most responsive to the representation of the human image. Perhaps art historians are as yet unwilling to discuss these works in ways apart from the life histories of Manet and Morisot. Students and scholars often use Manet's portraits as illustrations to a narrative relating events in Morisot's life. Particular portraits serve as points on a compass marking her first salon submissions, her relations with her family and friends, the decision to remain in Paris throughout the Franco-Prussian War, the death of her father, and Morisot's marriage. The material point is, when considered as a group of interrelated works, an infrequent occurrence. Manet's portraits of Morisot are most often discussed by scholars in terms of their personal relationship. The works are presented as evidence of an extended flirtation between friends, or as playful exchanges manifesting a language exclusive to clandestine lovers. In my view, such discussion does little to inform us about the pictures themselves. Particular works are singled out as evidence of Morisot's purportedly remote and depressed personality. Some have been characterized as presenting a brooding and solemn figure, such as Berthe Morisot in Profile, now seen. Others, including Repose, are said to reveal Morisot's melancholia. Discussion of her anxious nature or brooding disposition is speculative, intended as our declaration of Manet's fascination with her sharp-featured beauty to titillate an audience. Morisot was not a melancholic. The claim cannot be supported reliably, no matter how many times we are treated to the same passage quoted from her published letters. Works such as Berthe Morisot with a Veil and Berthe Morisot with a Fan, both from 1872, are said to be examples that serve to resolve the conflict between Manet's physical attraction to Morisot and his sense of artistic rivalry. As a talented painter and an attractive woman, Morisot is said to have presented a double threat to Manet. She, quote, jeopardized his control over the space of representation, reinforcing for him his own lack of contemporary critical acclaim. Thus, the use of veils and fans and ribbons and furs occludes Morisot's threat to Manet by making less frightening the desired object, Morisot herself, end quote. Frankly, that's absurd. It seems to me worthwhile to examine these portraits of Morisot within the context not of the artist's biographies, but in relation to Manet's early aesthetics. I propose to investigate Manet's Morisot in terms of ongoing intentions and objectives announced by the artist in his first professional works. Manet's interest in presenting people in costume, wearing disguise, veiled and holding fans, in presenting a visual rhetoric comprising inversions, reversals, and transpositions, pictorial motifs and themes revealing the complex relationship between appearance and perception, between modern painting and that of past artists, is communicated in works that launched the artist's professional career. The Absinthe Drinker from 1858-59 depicts a poor man dressed up in a black opera cloak and the artist's top hat. The person represented was an actual ragpicker named Collardet, who in fact was recognized by contemporaries as a bohemian frequenting areas near the Louvre. Ridiculed by critics and mocked in public by Couture, his former mentor, Manet's first major professional work revealed the uncertainty and anxiety felt about the counterfeit nature of disguise. In this painting, Manet has dressed a street cleaner, known to the viewers of the painting, in an assorted costume including heavy worker's pants, canvas shoes, and Spanish garb kept in his atelier. Indeed, this is a scene set purposely within the studio. Depicted performing in the corner of the painter's atelier, Manet attempts to challenge expectations regarding the authenticity of the subject represented. The Spanish singer is shown to be a fictional character, playing a part to a counterfeit audience in a picture in which the artist makes reference to the painted image as a metafiction, a painting that serves as a commentary not only on the nature of representation, but of the shifting nature of identity in modern culture. Manet's fascination with the spectacle of performance and the personality of the performer, with costumes and disguise, has been the subject of scholarly debate. Both the absinthe drinker and the Spanish guitarist have been interpreted in terms of Manet's use of costume and disguise as a critique of French culture during the Second Empire. Collardet's appropriation of the gentleman's cloak and the flaneur's top hat is likened to Karl Marx's explanation of Louis Napoleon's appropriation of inveterate political and cultural institutions. The ragpicker shown wearing the costume of a patrician stands as a parody of political and social culture during the Second Empire. The transparency of the ragpicker's disguise makes known the hypocrisies, the sanctimonious and insincerity of a government brought into being, according to Marx, by usurpation and the strategy of masquerade. Importantly, Manet shows disguise as a feature that both conceals and reveals the character of the wearer. The strategies of disguise, as we know its manners and modes, rely upon discernment. The recognition of a disguise depends upon disclosure. As a motivated display that seeks to elicit definitive responses, an unnoticed disguise fails. To be effective, it must be perceived. Boy with a Sword is an imaginative portrait of Leon Leenhoff, the son of the artist's wife. Pictured in the costume of a page worn in the Spanish court of the 17th century, the painting with its dark palette and vivid brushwork pays tribute to Manet's appreciation and indebtedness to Spanish painters Velázquez and Goya. Indeed, like Young Man in the Costume of a Majo, showing the artist's brother dressed as a Manolo, a Spanish figure known for having bravado in their sense of style and manners, he references particular Spanish works seen in the Louvre or studied by the artist when visiting Spain and the Prado in 1865. Many of these early works are inspired by a craze for all things Spanish in France at the time, in part due to the Spanish origins of Empress Eugenie, as well as a growingly cosmopolitan taste for Spanish theater, singing, and dance. This includes, of course, bullfighting, referenced here by a picture that once again features the brother of the artist in the guise of a matador. In the artist's most celebrated early works, ideas of guise and disguise have been presented not entirely as a result of the characterization of individuals pictured through costume, makeup, coiffure, accoutrement, and milieu. Disguise may be seen as an aspect of the identity and meaning of the works themselves. Manet was written about as the Parisian Spaniard, yet looking again at the painting Olympia, a work laughed at by many when shown to the public in 1865, we see Manet has purposely referenced the Italian Renaissance master Titian. In his own words, he wanted to present a modern Venus, doing so by picturing the artist's well-known model, Victorine Miron, as a courtesan shown as the goddess of love, yet in a style far removed from the delicate brushwork and soft outlines of an idealized form. Olympia becomes the modern Venus, Manet Titian in disguise, and the artist's studio, the modern museum, a brothel. Perhaps one of the most intriguing paintings in which ideas of guise and disguise are playfully engaged is a work entitled Fishing, dating to 1861-63, now seen. The artist has once again created a work masquerading as another painting, in this case Peter Paul Rubens' double portrait of himself and Helene Fermont, The Castle Park. A picture representing a pastoral landscape in which the presence of laborers seems out of place. Fishing also serves as a family portrait. Depicted in 17th century costume and posed in a manner borrowing directly from Rubens's Arcadian allegory, Manet has disguised himself and his fiancée in the bottom right corner of the composition. A painting depicting figures in costume and in modern dress, shown engaged in relaxation and labor. The painting presents a series of temporal and vocational juxtapositions. What is real and what is make-believe? With this works and others we have looked at, Manet challenges the viewer's assumptions about the subject, what is represented, and its meaning. With this painting, we see Manet divorcing himself from the school of French realism. Painting is not a mimetic exercise. Paintings do not present a window on the world. Works of art are inventions, the product of aesthetic convention and the artist's judgment and imagination. Writing about the surprise nymph dated to 1859-61, now seen, Alan Krell reminds us that the artist originally placed a satyr in the bushes, a stand-in for the voyeuristic viewer shown in the act of spying on the woman. According to Krell, the work references the subject of Susanna and the Elders, a biblical allusion cultivated by Manet, who used his fiancée Suzanne Leenhoff as the model for the nude nymph. A work intended to emulate paintings by Rubens and French artist Boucher, it is interesting to reflect on the event of surprise as a theme alluding to the mechanisms of disclosure that bring about the significance of identity and disguise. Making note of the multivalent function of disguise in Manet's works, let's look at several more examples which indicate the theme as key in his early aesthetics. We now see a work entitled Victorine Miron in the Costume of an Espada, dated to 1862. This is a painting in which the artist, interestingly, names his model, dresses her in a man's costume, and represents the figure looking directly at the viewer while fighting a bull. One notices she is not shown truly within the arena, but rather is rendered as a cutout figure posed in the artist's studio and silhouetted awkwardly against the fictive space of a bullfighting scene borrowed from Goya. The painting Young Woman in Spanish Costume, dated to 1862, is ostensibly a portrait of eminent French photographer Félix Nadar's mistress, depicted in the costume of a toreador. Once again, Manet has challenged the viewer's expectations about the sitter's identity, gender, and veracity of appearances. As viewers, are we to make note of the discarded fan shown at her feet, an instrument of disguise ill-suited to the toreador, thus cast off, while then taking at face value the figure of a woman posed dressed as a man? The titles of these works announce, they make known, the figures presented are costumed. Manet's works are to remind us of the genre of the characterized portrait, a portrait of the sitter presented as a biblical, mythological, allegorical, even historical figure, very fashionable in the 18th century and popularized by artists such as Largillier, Nattier, Reynolds, and others. Having taken on the subject of the performer and the theme of performance in works featuring, such as we have seen, bullfighters and courtesans, it should not surprise us Manet became interested in picturing the figure of the actor. His interest in representing figures in costume shown in disguise, depicted in circumstances and with motifs appropriate to the theme of role-playing and artifice, inspired his consideration of the world of popular theater. Variations upon stock characters such as Guise, Perrault the sad clown, seen in a painting by Watteau, held in the Louvre and which Manet had surely admired, and from the French puppet theatre, Polichinelle appear regularly in his work from the 1860s and 70s. Polichinelle was a character borrowed by the French from Italian predecessors. A type of Shakespearean Falstaff, Polichinelle is associated with masquerades, where he played the part of an uncouth, profane, mercurial sort beyond redemption and for the most part incomprehensible. This character type is expressed succinctly by the artist by means of flamboyant gestures and the heavy, rough brushwork he admired in Velasquez and the Dutch painter Frans Hals. The hands of Polichinelle are especially revealing of his study of the genre scenes of cavaliers, drinkers, and musical performers by Frans Hals. Revived from the repertoire of 17th and 18th century subjects, the standard characters of the misanthrope, the doctor, the pantaloon, harlequin, and Perrault were given their modern counterparts, the ragpicker, the flaneur, and the Parisian, the prostitute, and the street singer. Unlike Polichinelle, shown against a vague, smoky background without reference to the larger context for performance, the street singer is depicted in situ, having just emerged from a doorway on the streets of Paris, and with her guitar held loosely cradling a parcel of cherries. In the act of eating, she lifts several to her mouth. These are character types, a distinction Manet wished to make apparent to viewers by again using Victorine Meurent as the model for the work. Once again, the artist has blurred the distinction between the individual pictured and the performer, in this case shown out of character. Manet's representation of well-known performers in their costumes, that is to say, in character, may also be seen to relate to correspondences between identity and disguise, between the authentic and the fictive. It is interesting to note that in many cases the performer, the actor, has been divorced from the event of the performance itself, shown backstage wearing a magnificent costume loaded with spangles, allowing the artist to display his painterly technique. Lola de Valence, a famous Spanish ballerina, is backstage. Separated from one audience, she is posed for another. French opera singer Émilie Ambray has been rendered wearing the costume for her role as Carmen. In this half-length portrait, she is shown in a pose and with gestures in keeping with the fiery, strong-willed character of the gypsy. The artist's fascination with performers and performance led him naturally to the world of Shakespearean drama. Disguise and masks are devices employed in many works by the playwright, aiding in the progression of narrative and plot, and most revealingly in the treatment of identity and signification in definitions of character. In 19th century thought, these ideas became a type, a topos expressing new ideas that emerged in 19th century philosophy, and that began to be studied by contemporary psychologists, which overturned determinists' concepts about identity. Simply stated, for now, individual identity began to be seen as diverse, various, composed of shifting qualities of character and personality. There developed a science of self. Appropriately, Manet was taken with the figure of Hamlet, a character who steps outside the action of narrative in the play and contemplates his thoughts and actions, in doing so imparting a universal meaning to his personal dilemma. We see a portrait of the famous baritone Jean-Baptiste Faux in the role of Hamlet. Importantly, Manet has presented a particular moment in the plot. Hamlet, at the time when the prince first sees the king's ghost. Faux was an art collector who had purchased works by the artist. It is said he did not like the image and refused it. The painting is a rather stark portrayal of vulnerability. In this example, reproduced several times in paintings and in prints, Philibert Rouvier is presented in one of his most celebrated roles. The actor stands alone in theatrical lighting. The physical space shown, an uncertain landscape created through patchwork shading, is confounded by the distorted image of Hamlet's shadow. These devices help purvey the complexities of Shakespeare's character, his inner conflict dramatized by the actors gazing into the distance and the gesture of crossing hands. Manet used themes of guise and disguise, ideas about character and costume in ways that suggest political, social, economic, and psychological meaning. Guise is also, as we have seen, used in art historical allusions made by the painter, having borrowed and quoting from artists of the past. The Masked Ball at the Opera, a painting purchased by Faux, the dissatisfied patron who posed as Hamlet, was a large multi-figure genre painting refused exhibition at the official Salon of 1874. Conceived as a modern history painting, numerous sketches and prefatory drawings for the work were made. Several of his friends and colleagues posed independently for the picture in studio. It should be considered as one of the principal statements of the artist about the nature and conditions of modern life, and was defended by the leading French poet Mallarmé as, quote, paramount in the artist's oeuvre. The subject of the painting is the arena of public life, specifically the realm of the arts, the theater, the opera house, dance halls, more broadly the city of Paris itself, its environs, its institutions, and the rituals associated with them, the pastimes and pleasures afforded a modern metropolitan population. In this painting, he revived a subject and themes treated a decade earlier in his monumental Music in the Tuileries from 1862. As with Masked Ball at the Opera, this work includes portraits of family and friends in the Tuileries Gardens next to the Louvre, where weekly concerts were held for the public. Including a number of identifiable figures, contemporary composers, musicians, poets, and painters, friends and family, Manet includes a self-portrait, standing in the far left foreground of the picture dressed in a manner befitting his social status and the particular occasion. It is no coincidence the poet Baudelaire is presented by the artist, shown seated in front of a tree behind the figure of Manet's brother Eugène, shown in white trousers. Charles Baudelaire, author of Fleur de Mal, was the leading advocate of the new painting, and had been celebrated by numerous artists, including Gustave Courbet, who featured Baudelaire in his seminal canvas, The Painter's Studio, in 1855. Baudelaire's important treatise, the essay The Painter of Modern Life, was written and published at the same time Manet was finishing Music in the Tuileries. Baudelaire's essay, published in 3 installments, encouraged the new painters to move away from academic art and cultivate new subjects, innovate new manners and modes for representing the modern world around them. Baudelaire wrote, quote, "The crowd is his element," claiming the artist is a type of flaneur, a philosopher and poet. Quote, "The lover of pictures who lives in a magical society of dreams painted on canvas. Thus the lover of universal life enters into the crowd as though it were an immense reservoir of electrical energy. Or we might liken him to a mirror as vast as the crowd itself, or to a kaleidoscope gifted with consciousness, responding to each one of its movements and reproducing the multiplicity of life and the flickering grace of all the elements of life." End quote. An extremely complex painting, including Manet's reference to modern music and his musical aesthetics. In terms of ideas about character and costume, the figures are shown rather stilted, and characterization seems based on a criteria of visual uniformity, a conception of identity based upon the perception of a standardized type. Stated simply, they wear the costumes of modernity. It is important to remember the conventions of uniforms were established by the 19th century. Corporate uniforms, school uniforms, military and police, even prison uniforms, were conventions well established at the time, including, of course, manners of dress associated with particular social and economic classes. Perhaps we can make sense of these works by recalling the philosopher Walter Benjamin's interrogation of types in 19th century French society. Benjamin suggested that modern identity is formed by means of one's assuming a character type, a receptacle or empty vessel through which identity flows rather than one in which it resides. Reviewing, as we have, Manet's use of the themes of disguise in pictures and portraits from the 1860s and 70s, examining the nature of individual and group identity, may help us understand better the context in which the portraits of Morisot were inspired. Berthe Morisot Reclining from 1873, once a much larger work, is an oil portrait that has been cut down and presents a half-length figure reclining on a chaise longue, looking out directly at the viewer with a serene, calm countenance. Emphasis has been given to the head and face as key elements relating identity, character, and the personality of the sitter. In many ways, the work is in keeping with the new realist traditions showing a woman reclining, whether in a fully realized context or against a neutral, vaguely defined background, as we see here. As a larger portrait, before being cut down to its current format, the work may be likened to and compared with other paintings by the artist, including Repose, the first portrait showing Morisot by herself, alone, as well as with others we have seen, such as Baudelaire's Mistress Reclining and this work, Portrait of Madame Manet on a Blue Couch, from 1874. Each present a well-dressed woman of leisure, shown in a relaxed, staid pose with a neutral expression suggestive of contemplation. Revealing a meditative, quiescent figure, the painting presents established conventions in the representation of a particular facet of the life of leisure in modern Parisian culture. Like his avant-garde counterparts, wishing, as Baudelaire recommended, to create works inspired by the zeitgeist of the period that were expressive of modernity, Manet challenges the manners and modes of highly polished, meticulously finished works championed by the institutions of the French academies of art and the press. The aesthetics of academic art may be seen in works such as Alexandre Cabanel's remarkable and beautiful picture entitled Albidaide from 1848. Albidaide, a character from Victor Hugo's collection of poems Orientales, written in 1829, is an historical subject associated with the Greek War of Independence of 1821. Exotic Eastern motifs are completed by Cabanel with a beautiful, partially nude figure looking out with narrowing eyes, a seductive gaze making known her position as a courtesan. Manet, of course, has eschewed the romanticism of Cabanel's subject, as well as the erotic characterization of her countenance and the symbolism of the periwinkle held in her hand. Like Baudelaire, Manet wished to impart the modernity of the figure, her belonging to the contemporary world. For each age, Baudelaire claimed in his essay, The Painter of Modern Life, quote, has a deportment, a glance and smile of its own. By neglecting it, you cannot fail to tumble into the abyss of an abstract and indeterminate beauty. If for the necessary costume of the age you substitute another, you will be guilty of a mistranslation, only to be excused in the case of a masquerade prescribed by fashion. Looking closely, we see the painter has attentively rendered the deportment of the figure, her particular glance and smile. In fact, Manet has presented Morisot with a face revealing new ideas about identity and expression put forward by the modern sciences of biology, neurology, and psychology. She has been shown as having a multivalent countenance, suggesting differing facets of character and personality, making known new ideas about the complex nature of identity and its distinct manifestation. The right side of her face has been painted with lighter tones, her mouth turned slightly upward, and her green eye narrowed slightly askew, with a distant focus. This is different from the left side of Morisot's face, which is shown somewhat darker, in soft shadow, with her mouth blunted and turned downward, her eye given a highlight showing reflected light, presenting a more focused, outwardly conscious effect and demeanor. Let us return to this consideration of Morisot's bifurcated face, her multivalent expression later, after having looked at several more examples in the series. There are several important questions confronting anyone attempting to interpret Manet's portraits of Morisot. Should, for example, the paintings be considered as distinct, isolated works? The larger, more polished portraits exhibited to the public at Salon, investigated independently from the smaller, spontaneous works painted later, never intended for public view? Or should the portraits be thought of as a series, as these two works from 1874 may compel us, a group of interrelated paintings that present a sustained commentary engaging similar aesthetic issues and problems? There is no need to rehearse a history of portraiture that relates precedents for Manet's many paintings of Morisot. Patrons throughout history have had their favorite portraitists. Boucher's many paintings of Madame du Pompadour in the 18th century leap to mind. Ingres was favored several times with requests from particular patrons. One may even think of these artists as publicists and biographers. Patrons had favorite artists, and artists gave preference to particular clients. This tradition of allegiance and patronage did not abate in modern France. Many 19th century artists executed multiple portraits of individual sitters. Most artists of Manet's circle, including Morisot, were devoted to painting portraits of friends and family. Indeed, the genre of the friendship portrait, and of the tribute portrait, as examples by Manet's close friend Fantin Latour make known, had an important place in modernist aesthetics. Yet, when one considers the number of portraits of Morisot painted by Manet, and the brief period in which they were executed, Manet's achievement comes into full relief. Outside of methods used by historians to study modes of serial painting in Impressionist art, I am thinking principally of examples like Monet's series of haystacks or cathedrals, his water lilies, or Degas' suites of bathers and dancers. There are few models from which to proceed. As noted, reliance upon biographical methodologies does little to aid our understanding of Manet's complex, eclectic works. Begin to understand or to think about Manet's Morisot as a series of interrelated works, we may wish to think about the genre of self-portraiture as it was practiced by artists Manet studied or admired, such as Goya, Vigée Lebrun, Gustave Courbet, and of course Van Gogh, to name only the most celebrated examples. Like Manet, these painters wished to relate their investigations of the complex nature of identity and its distinct manifestations. Is identity a set, constant, and uniform condition of being in the world? Is individual identity an essence, readily subject to objective understanding and an unbiased rendering? Or rather, is identity diverse, various, composed of shifting and contrary qualities of character and personality? When considered as and seen in series, like Monet's haystacks, Manet's Morisot may be considered as presenting variations on a theme, with their appropriate musical allusions. It's important to note that these questions were the topic of impassioned debate during the 19th century. The belief that identity was composed of various, ever-changing, and unpredictable qualities of character and fact predates Romanticism and can be found in the writings of Descartes, Hume, Locke, Diderot, and Kant. However, within the newly institutionalized fields of anthropology, biology, sociology, and psychology, questions about the nature of identity in the 19th century served as a touchstone for the study of the origins and the history of humankind and human civilization. Manet's portraits of Morisot may indeed be compared to many of his representations of friends, models, and entertainers shown in pictures from his early career. Perhaps the artist saw Morisot in the same way he imagined Victorine Miron, as an exemplar of a modern type, a person able to shift or alter features and qualities of selfhood for expressive effect, as we have seen in The Prince, variations on the painting of Morisot with Bouquet of Violets. In Berthe Morisot with a Veil, dated to 1872, she is depicted in the immediate foreground of the composition. Not facing the viewer directly, Morisot is posed slightly aslant and with her arms folded across her body. She is presented as a cocooned figure. In this picture, Morisot is presented in thoroughly modern costume, a type of Parisienne. The elaborate hat, brown cape, red scarf, and of course the veil have been treated in an extremely abbreviated manner comparable to the darkened, textured background. Inert pose, stifled gestures, and severe, conflicted expression given Morisot are ideal counterparts to the theme of disguise. The veil becomes a type of mask. We see behind the veil but just. As a fashionable accessory worn for discretion, we can pierce it, but only to a blurred, camouflaged countenance that, once again, appears to be bifurcated, expressing seemingly conflicting emotional states of being. In a certain sense, concealed from scrutiny, the veil alerts us to the figure's reticence. The mask cannot hide the face. Disguise may often be understood to reveal more than it conceals. Dressed as a modern woman of fashion, a Parisienne, she is nevertheless presented as a somewhat dissolute figure. Beauty and eloquence are not celebrated and recall the pictures of particular French Rococo masters, such as Jean-Antoine Watteau, much admired by Manet and his circle of painters, and remembered through the poetry of symbolist Paul Verlaine, who in his poem Fête Galante writes, quote, "Your soul is a chosen landscape, where charming masked and costumed figures go, playing the lute and dancing and almost sad beneath their fantastic disguises." End quote. The figure of Morisot echoes sentiments expressed by Baudelaire, who claimed, "I can barely conceive of a type of beauty in which there is no melancholy." In this portrait, also from 1872, Berthe Morisot with fan, we see the figure not dressed in clothing associated with contemporary Parisian styles, but rather in a dark full-length dress recognized as Spanish. Shown seated in a chair placed with its back against the wall, in the midground she interestingly is positioned sideways, with her left leg crossed over the right. Morisot holds a fan to her face in a provocative and intriguing manner. Fabricated in a style matching her dress, an aspect of accoutrement, the fan is not held in a manner appropriate to social ceremony. Instead, Morisot may be seen to look through its ribs in the direction of the viewer. As features of costume or disguise, the dresses and pink shoes, the fan, the veil and violets, her pose and gestures, are employed as oratorical features, and are perhaps but affectations, calling attention to the pretense of appearances. Evocative and alluring, a monumental figure guarded and remote, a Parisian woman shown in Spanish costume. For some, she personified society's pleasures, while making manifest facets of its anxiety. A work executed in the same year as Berthe Morisot with fan, in Berthe Morisot with a pink shoe, she is depicted wearing what appears to be the same black Spanish dress. Now depicted as having discarded her fan, she also has abandoned her chair and stands directly before us, having raised a hand across her body, resting it just below her neck, a gesture of modesty and reserve. She is placed against a diffuse background, appearing as blue sky behind a wide balcony. In this work, Morisot is a figure now unfettered, open and more accessible to the viewer. In both of these portraits, one cannot but notice the pink shoes, here seen looking once again at a detail from Berthe Morisot with a fan, displayed conspicuously by the sitter after having crossed her legs. Named in the title of this work, the shoes are emphasized not only by their brilliant color, but call attention through Morisot's distinct pose. Her shoe is thrust from underneath the dress and is the feature closest to the picture plane. What should we make of these pink shoes? Seemingly a feature of costume ill-matched to the black Spanish dress, are they also an aspect of Manet's themes of guise and disguise? Manet had explored the phenomenon, as evident in this stunning and enigmatic example, a young woman, sometimes referred to as Young Woman with a Parrot, from 1866, featuring the model Victorine Miron. The fascination for pink shoes is revealed in the writings of Edmond and Jules de Goncourt. Specifically, pink shoes were celebrated in their chapter on François Boucher, appearing in the volume French 18th Century Painters. In their discussion of Boucher's art, pink shoes are one of the many components of costume seized upon as an image evoking nostalgia for the world of the 18th century and for the art of the French masters of the past. Motifs in paintings by Watteau, Boucher, and Latour, singled out by the Goncourt brothers, included women shown reclining on couches, holding fans, wearing veils, masks, beribboned with satins, shown with violets and pink shoes, and are defended as aspects of an essentially poetic vision. In my view, in many ways, Manet intended to emulate works by the French little masters and re-establish the visionary realm celebrated by the Goncourts in their study of French Rococo paintings as a key aspect of modern aesthetics. Indeed, Manet may have wished to refer directly to the figure of Madame du Pompadour and to works by Boucher when painting portraits of Morisot. Both were handsome, eloquent, extremely charming, and well-educated and intelligent, strong-willed women. Like Madame du Pompadour, the muse of King Louis XV, who came to define both an historical period while establishing the manners of taste and fashion in the 18th century. Morisot inspired the artist by her ability to characterize an epoch. Manet thought of himself as much an heir to the 18th century French painters as he believed Morisot's successor to the legacy of Madame du Pompadour's sophistication and intelligence. The revival of Rococo subjects, themes, and motifs by Manet and his circle is a somewhat understudied aspect of French 19th century painting. Manet's portraits of Morisot are rich, illusory works. Several are remindful of the feelings of languor, the mood of fantasy, the state of daydreams, idleness, and abandonment expressed in works by French Rococo artists. Reflecting on the history and customs of the 18th century, the Goncourts advocated a return to manners and modes of art, quote, filled with the elegance of a supernatural life, an enchantment, 1,000 enchantments, rising upon the wings from the whims of the artist's brain, from the humors of artistic practice, from the absolute originality of genius, end quote. Yet, I submit that Manet was a thoroughly modern painter, an artist attuned to the most recent ideas advanced by the modern sciences of biology and psychology, devoted to the study and understanding of the modes and mechanisms of human expressivity. One of the most significant and compelling aspects of the painter's portraits of Morisot is related to new theories about the nature of personality, personal expression, and their relation to individual character and identity. Impressionist artists, with their emphasis on the recording of specific, transitory, and the more ephemeral moments of modern life, were particularly sensitive to the new ideas concerning the immanence of individual personality and expression, no longer thought to be a fixed entity or formed by general and permanent principles isolated from the immediate experience of sensation and perception. Ideas about individual character were transformed radically in the mid-19th century. Related briefly, these new ideas developed from aspects of 18th and 19th century philosophy, from the new science of psychology, and from Darwinian biology. Individual character was deemed to be contingent upon and subordinate to particular conditions and circumstances. The character and personality of an individual could be determined only by means of direct experience, or, indeed, as some believed, could be ascertained solely through semblance. In the late 19th century, human character and personality were understood and defined not as a fixed entity, but varied in individuals from moment to moment. Furthermore, someone's appearance, like the appearance of material objects and the different forms of nature, were found to be dependent upon the qualities of our perception and feelings. One was what one appeared to be, yet one person could acquire and was able to maintain different appearances, which themselves were made to correspond with particular situations and circumstances. Changing one's outward appearance became a means to alter identity, one's self. Appearances fashioned for the world no longer were taken to be the veil obscuring genuine, more fundamental traits of character, but were in themselves thought to be essential emblematic guides to authenticity. Personality, as it was believed to be plainly visible, that is to say, immanent, changing and changeable, became in the 19th century deeply self-conscious. Simply stated, the human mind, human emotion, and its mechanisms of expression were discovered to be the products of a long evolutionary development. Immanence, an idea that developed directly from the evolutionary theories of Darwin and Spencer, while relying upon many of the prescripts of physiognomy, as with other aspects of human evolutionary development, anatomical, physiological, and psychological. Personality, as it was expressed through human behavior and emotion, was thought to have originated in a phylogenetic past and to have evolved over time by means of natural selection and adaptation. The belief that emotions could express themselves through gesture or countenance, that personality in individuals is often manifested unwillingly, against or uncontrolled by human agency, was a frequent subject in the motivational theories of John Locke, Hobbes, and Kant. As crucial a concept as was free will to the formation of the romantic ideologies of self and self-government, notable philosophers and psychologists such as John Stuart Mill and Thomas Reid conceded some aspects of emotional character and their expressive movements are present in the natural constitution of human beings. Some types of behavior occur without volition, and when exhibited can be attributed to creaturely instincts, habits, appetites, and affections. Some expressions were discovered to be reflexive and involuntary, and others still to be vestigial, to have outlived their original function and have carried over in humans as rudimentary. In his unrivaled study entitled The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals, published in 1872, Charles Darwin identified principles that explain the production of, in his words, expressions and gestures involuntarily used by man and the lower animals, under the influence of various emotions and sensations. Involuntary appearance of feeling in gesture and countenance was a very important aspect of Darwin's treatise, for its truth helped establish the ancient origins and the innate characteristics of particular modes and manners of expressivity, while at the same time signaled the emotions as genuinely experienced, its authenticity. On the basis of his investigations, Darwin concluded that, quote, "As far as we can judge, only a few expressive movements are learnt by each individual, that is, were consciously and voluntarily performed during the early years of life for some definite object, or in imitation of others, and then become habitual. The far greater number of the movements of expression, and all the more important ones, are, as we have seen, innate or inherited, and as such cannot be said to depend on the will of the individual." End quote. Seemingly presented in a manner befitting her age, station, and gender, as a reserved, demure woman of taste and means, in these portraits Manet has portrayed a figure who was unable to contain or mask her feelings. The artist has rendered the characteristics of immanent expression by dividing Morisot's face into dissimilar and diverse halves, indicative of two distinct states of being and becoming. Truly, Berthe Morisot with Bouquet of Violets, and this work, Berthe Morisot Reclining, are paintings that compel viewers to focus their attention upon the physiognomy of the sitter. These portraits of Morisot are concurrent with a number of scientific treatises on the mechanisms of human facial expression, including Darwin's treatise on the expression of emotion in man and animals. Yet Manet may well have been inspired by the same sources that helped to revive physiognomy as a modern science and that propelled Darwin's thesis. Published in 1862, Guillaume Bonamine Amand Duchenne's eccentric Mécanisme de la physionomie humaine was cited by Darwin himself as contributing to a greater understanding of the mechanisms of emotive expression. Duchenne's treatise, along with Pierre Gratiolet's posthumously published lectures on anatomy, were two better-known examples of controlled and methodological investigations applied to the science of physiognomy published in the second half of the 19th century. The work of Duchenne, who specialized in using localized electrical stimulation to map individual muscle action, and the close observation, photographic recording, and analysis of these movements, is said to have pioneered the field of kinesiology. Duchenne's breakthrough work contained a lengthy discussion of his findings as they related to human expression in the history of art, as well as a section dedicated to applying, quote, their happy or fortunate applications to the study of the fine arts, end quote. His notoriety within artistic circles stems from the corrections and remodeling of select famous antique works of sculpture. Perhaps the paradigmatic example is Duchenne's reworking of aspects of the facial expression of Laocoon from the Laocoon group, a Greek sculpture rediscovered in 1506 and which had become, for the Romantics, the emblem of human physical and psychological agony. In what he called the aesthetic section of his treatise, Duchenne presented, quote, rules to guide the artist in the true and complete portrayal of the movements of the soul, end quote. Also regarded as a novatory figure in science for his use of photography, photographs were used not only as illustrations to his text, but because of photography's perceived mimetic quality, become proof for Duchenne's assertions. Importantly, the aesthetic section often presented figures stimulated to expression who are given costumes and gestures as supplements to their facial cast. Like many of his contemporaries, Manet was well aware of the notion of the human face as capable of at once manifesting dual or distinct aspects of personality and character. The outward expression of the multifold nature of the human mind and soul was a recurrent theme, as mentioned, in Romantic art and philosophy. To illustrate human multivalence more effectively, Duchenne had used the technique of isolating one half of the subject's face as an indispensable method with which to both produce and interpret often contrasting subtleties of human expressivity. Looking again at Berthe Morisot with violets, we see the artist truly has created two wholly distinct expressions which are blended in the viewer's perception. The right side of her face has been treated as a thin, bright, projecting form and may be characterized as expressive of youth and vitality, if not for the distant and unfocused appearance of the eye. Shaded, the left side has been rendered as a broader, darker, receding form, matching the color and texture of the diaphanous curtains in the background. This side reveals a more mature and aggressive personality. The left side manifests an active engagement with the space she inhabits. The recognition of a synergetic quality of human facial expression, where the viewer conjoins distinct portions of the face to form an overall impression of personality and character, is a phenomenon Duchenne called the illusion. It is, interestingly, a type of optical illusion that he closely likened to the laws of the chromatic contrasting of colors presented by Chevreul, an important impressionist critic and theoretician. Remember, Manet developed his ideas about the representation of multivalence in a succession of lithographs based on the portrait Berthe Morisot with violets. Rather than describe these works in relation to the biography of Manet and Morisot, could we not make sense of them as indication of the artist's continuing investigations into the nature of identity and immanent expression? Looking at yet another portrait of Morisot painted by Manet in 1874 entitled Berthe Morisot in Mourning Hat, we are startled by the dour and desolate expression of an individual who has suffered emotionally and psychologically after the death of her father. Presented in the immediate foreground as a half-length figure against a neutral background, she is shown in the costume of bereavement. Yet, given the title of the portrait, it is interesting to note how little attention has been paid by the artist to Morisot's black hat and its sheer veil. Rather, once again, Manet has given supreme emphasis to the face and to the characterization of expressive physiognomy. The black veil of mourning has been lifted, and we are witness to the revelation of a depth of feeling considered inappropriate for public display. An extraordinarily intimate portrait. Morisot exhibits her response to tragedy and her confidence in Manet's friendship. She is shown resting her heavy hand upon a black-gloved fist, an unseemly and somewhat vulgar pose unbefitting a woman of her status and means. Shown in the canonical pose of the thinker, she is presented as a figure absorbed completely in her own thoughts, ill-prepared for the ceremony of picture-making. Facing the viewer directly, she is, however, seemingly unaware of her condition as the subject of a picture. The most interesting and noteworthy feature of facial expressivity in Manet's representation of Morisot's countenance are the eyes, the windows to the soul. Her right eye is depicted as centered and oriented directly outward. However, her left eye appears to be askew, having drifted or angled upward and towards the viewer's right, and would be in fact incapable of providing Morisot binocular vision. Indeed, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and chin have been not rendered as symmetrical features. In fact, her entire visage is presented as an imbalanced, irregular, disparate, one may even say grotesque form. The abbreviation of forms in the portrait is a remarkable aspect of the work, and is essential to the communication of the depth, complexity, the extremity of the sitter's emotional state, and her existential identity. As Baudelaire claimed, strangeness is a necessary ingredient in beauty. The veil has been lifted only to reveal the mask beneath it, the face, multiform and various. In this instance, our recognition of the bifurcation of facial expressivity is not aided by a brilliant raking light that leaves one half of the figure's face in shadow. In this work, light is shown to strike the figure directly, leaving the left side below her cheek and jowl in shadow, a collapsing or sunken structure expressive of almost an ascetic demeanor. Life with Violets from 1872 was given as a gift to Morisot by the painter as thanks and in friendship. A handwritten note is included, signed and dedicated to Berthe, a tribute to qualities of a person he found so expressive of modernity, in memory of the relationship that brought the portraits into being, presenting the motifs of the fan and violets found in so many of the pictures, emblems of modesty and humility. They are also symbolic of faithfulness, loyalty between friends and between creative artists. Veils and masks, costumes and cosmetics, fans and furs do not hide a sovereign identity. They signify an individual's participation in a domain including the political, social, and the psychological. Activity within a dynamic sphere, a universe of human relations where complex aspects of character and characterization are being invented, enacted, and tested. What the portraits reveal is a figure nothing less than what Baudelaire named a kaleidoscope, gifted with consciousness, responding to each one of its movements, and reproducing the multiplicity of life and the flickering grace of all the elements of life.